Welcome in, because these ordinary-looking state quarters may be hiding something most people never notice. We are examining Rhode Island, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Virginia to uncover what separates common pocket change from the truly collectible examples. First coin. Rhode Island occupies the smallest piece of land of any U.S. state, yet the 2001 Rhode Island quarter carries a design that captures a surprisingly large part of American history in just 24.3 millimeters of metal. At first glance, it looks like another ordinary state quarter. George Washington on the obverse, a sailing vessel on the reverse, and a small D identifying Denver. But this particular coin becomes much more interesting when you stop looking at it as simply a quarter and start examining what separates an everyday circulated example from an unusually preserved, high-grade, or genuinely mint-era specimen. The U.S. Mint released the Rhode Island design on May 21, 2001, making it the 13th coin in the 50-state quarters program and the third state design issued that year. Later, we will examine what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction, why some pieces remain close to face value while others can command dramatically higher premiums, and which physical characteristics collectors examine before assigning serious value. The important point from the beginning is that the date and D mint mark alone do not make this quarter rare. The real story is hidden in condition, strike quality, errors, varieties, certification, and the survival of exceptional examples. The historical setting of this coin is almost as interesting as the coin itself. By 2001, the 50-state quarters program had become one of the most successful modern American coin programs ever introduced, placing a different state-inspired reverse into circulation roughly every 10 weeks. Rhode Island was especially significant because it represented the 13th and final of the original 13 colonies to receive its state quarter design. The U.S. Mint specifically described the May 21, 2001 release as a milestone because the first 13 states were now represented on circulating commemorative-style coinage. Rhode Island had entered the Union on May 29, 1790, and its quarter embraces the state's maritime identity through the nickname the Ocean State. The reverse shows the historic sailing yacht Reliance moving through Narragansett Bay, with the Claiborne-Pell Newport Bridge appearing in the background. The imagery was not chosen randomly. Rhode Island's coastline, bays, shipbuilding traditions, sailing culture, and connection to the Atlantic are fundamental parts of its history. The coin therefore serves two purposes simultaneously. It was ordinary money intended for everyday commerce, but it was also part of a national educational program designed to make Americans look more closely at the history of individual states. That combination explains why millions of people saved these coins when they were new, while millions of others spent them without a second thought. Technically, the 2001 Rhode Island quarter is a standard copper-nickel-clad Washington quarter struck at the Denver Mint. PCGS records the regular strike issue at a mintage of 447,100,000 pieces, with a diameter of 24.3 millimeters, a weight of 5.67 grams, and a reeded edge. Its outer composition is 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded over copper core, giving the coin the familiar silvery appearance while revealing a copper-colored center along the edge. The D beneath the main design identifies Denver as the production facility, and that mint mark is important because collectors distinguish the Denver and Philadelphia issues even though they share the same Rhode Island reverse. The obverse retained the Washington portrait originally designed by John Flanagan, with the state quarter-era modifications associated with the program, while the reverse design is credited to Thomas D. Rogers. Producing hundreds of millions of quarters required enormous quantities of metal strip to be rolled to precise thickness, punched into planchets, annealed, cleaned, and fed through high-pressure coining presses. The dies forced the obverse and reverse designs into the planchet, while the collar controlled the diameter and helped form the reeded edge. That manufacturing process is exactly why collectors study imperfections. When something goes wrong at the mint, the resulting physical evidence can sometimes transform an ordinary quarter into a legitimate era coin. And this is where the difference between rarity and simple age becomes crucial. The 2001 Rhode Island quarter is not rare merely because it is now more than 2 decades old. A mintage of 447.1 million means an enormous number entered commerce, and many remain available in collections, rolls, bags, and old accumulations. PCGS currently classifies the regular issue as a very common coin overall, with substantial estimated survival even in higher grades. In circulated condition, a normal example may be worth little more than its 25-cent face value, while an attractive uncirculated coin can bring a modest premium. NGC's auction data shows how strongly grade affects the market. Its recorded sales include an MS-66 example at $9 and an MS-68 PCGS example at $199.75, illustrating that even within the same date and mint mark, preservation can create a major difference. PCGS lists the regular issue auction record at $200 for an MS-68 example sold through Heritage Auctions in December 2016. Those numbers are important precisely because they prevent exaggeration. A normal 2001 Rhode Island quarter should not be represented as a 4-figure rarity. A collector might encounter an exceptionally nice certified example around the low hundreds rather than thousands, while a hypothetical $1,000 plus valuation would require something substantially more unusual, such as a spectacularly rare and authenticated mint era, not simply an ordinary coin with a high grade. The real treasure hunt begins when the coin departs from normal production. Collectors examine Rhode Island quarters for off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through errors, die breaks, unusual planchet problems, and missing clad layer errors. But appearance alone is never enough. A coin that looks strangely colored may simply have environmental damage, chemical exposure, artificial tunning, plating, or another post-mint alteration. A damaged edge does not automatically indicate a mint error either. One documented 2001 Rhode Island example offered through Great Collections was a 7% straight-end clip certified by PCGS as MS-64, demonstrating the kind of physical production mistake that can receive formal attribution and enter the specialist market. Other reported Rhode Island pieces have raised questions about missing clad layers or unusual surfaces, but specialists emphasize the importance of determining whether the condition occurred during manufacturing or after the coin entered circulation. That distinction can mean hundreds of dollars. An authenticated major error can potentially reach the $1,000 range or beyond when the error is dramatic, clearly attributable, well-preserved, and supported by strong collector demand, whereas an ordinary discoloration or scratch has essentially no numismatic premium. This is also why online asking prices should never be confused with auction results. A seller can place any number beside a coin, but a certified coin that actually sells establishes much stronger evidence of market value. Condition creates another layer of complexity. Professional grading generally runs from heavily worn grades into about uncirculated and then mint state grades, with numerical levels extending towards 70. For this modern quarter, the difference between MS-64, MS-65, MS-66, MS-67, and MS-68 can be surprisingly significant because millions of coins were struck and collectors can afford to be selective. At the highest levels, tiny marks, contact abrasions, weak details, luster interruptions, and strike softness can prevent a coin from receiving the next grade. The 2001 Rhode Island quarter has reached MS-68 at PCGS, and PCGS's population information shows how unusual that top grade is compared with the much larger population below it. Collectors also examine the coin's original mint luster, the sharpness of the yacht and bridge, the clarity of Washington's hair and facial details, and the overall cleanliness of the fields. Modern clad coins can develop attractive tunning, but color itself does not automatically make a coin valuable. Traditional grading terminology such as brown, and red is primarily associated with copper coinage, so a collector should be cautious when a seller uses dramatic color language to suggest rarity on a copper-nickel-clad quarter. Likewise, proof coins and special silver-proof versions from 2001 belong to different collecting categories and should not be confused with the Denver circulation strike simply because their designs look similar. Authentication becomes especially important when a supposed error appears valuable. A genuine mint error should normally display a physical mechanism consistent with the minting process. A clipped planchet should show the characteristic shape and metal behavior expected from a blank struck near the edge of a planchet strip. An off-center strike should show missing design in a manner consistent with the planchet's position in the collar. A missing clad layer should expose the underlying copper in a way consistent with the construction of a clad quarter. Weight can be useful, but it should never be the only test, because wear, damage, measurement tolerances, and other factors can influence readings. For a normal 2001 D quarter, the expected weight is 5.67 grams. Collectors should inspect both faces and the entire edge under good lighting, preferably with magnification, while avoiding cleaning or polishing the coin. Harsh chemicals, abrasives, jewelry cleaners, rubbing, or attempts to improve the appearance can permanently damage the surfaces and reduce collector appeal. For valuable pieces, inert holders, capsules, or professionally graded slabs provide far better long-term protection than loose storage in plastic bags or environments containing moisture and reactive materials. If an apparent error looks significant, professional authentication from a recognized grading service is far safer than relying on an online listing or a visual comparison with photographs. That step becomes particularly important before treating a coin as a four-figure discovery. Ultimately, the 2001 D Rhode Island quarter is a fascinating example of how modern coins can divide into completely different collecting categories depending on what survives. The ordinary circulated piece is a common state quarter and generally carries little premium, while high-grade certified examples can become desirable condition pieces, with documented MS-68 sales reaching roughly the $200 level rather than the sensational prices sometimes claimed online. The truly exceptional opportunities are associated with authenticated mint errors or other unusual characteristics, where a strong combination of rarity, visibility, condition, certification, and collector competition can push a coin toward four-figure territory. Even then, a hypothetical $2,750 or $3,600 result would represent an extraordinary specialist coin, not the normal value of every 2001 D Rhode Island quarter. The most important lesson is therefore not to assume that the D mint mark makes the coin rare, nor to assume that every unusual-looking surface is a mint error. Instead, examine the date and mint mark, confirm the standard specifications, study the strike and surfaces, compare the coin with reliable references, and establish whether an unusual feature can be traced to the minting process. What makes this quarter worth studying is the contrast between its enormous production and the tiny fraction of pieces that can stand apart through exceptional preservation or genuine mint-made mistakes. More than 2 decades after its release, the coin still carries the story of Rhode Island's maritime heritage, the historic completion of the original 13-state sequence, and the remarkable collecting experiment that brought state history into American pocket change. Next coin. The 2000p Maryland quarter looks ordinary enough to disappear into a handful of change, yet this particular coin has developed a serious following among collectors because it sits at the intersection of American history, the enormous state quarters phenomenon, and the difficult search for truly exceptional condition. When it was released, few people could have imagined that a quarter showing the Maryland State House would eventually become the subject of specialized grading, registry collecting, error hunting, and high-grade auction competition. The Philadelphia Mint struck an enormous number of these coins, so the simple presence of a P mint mark does not make one rare. What matters is what happened to an individual coin after it left the presses, and whether it possesses the combination of preservation, strike quality, originality, rarity, and authentication that serious collectors are willing to pursue. As we move through the history of the 2000p Maryland, the Old Line State Quarter, we will uncover the details that separate an ordinary example from an exceptional one, examine documented auction evidence, and explain the characteristics that ultimately determine what a particular specimen can command in the collector market. The story begins in 2000, when the United States was in the middle of one of the most ambitious circulating coin programs in modern American history. The 50-state quarters program was releasing 5 state designs each year, and Maryland became the 7th state represented, following Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. The Maryland Quarter was released on March 13, 2000, and its design was intended to transform a familiar piece of pocket change into a miniature history lesson. The reverse centers on the Maryland State House in Annapolis, a building whose significance reaches directly into the Revolutionary War era. Construction began in 1772, and although the building was not completed until 1797, the Continental Congress met there from November 1783 through August 1784. During that period, the Treaty of Paris ending the Revolutionary War was ratified there, giving the building an extraordinary place in the story of the young United States. The design also incorporates clusters of white oak leaves, representing Maryland's state tree, while the words, "The Old Line State," recall the Maryland line troops who served in numerous Revolutionary War battles. The date, 1788, identifies Maryland's admission to the Union, while 2000 identifies the year of the quarter's release. This was therefore more than a decorative reverse. It was a carefully compressed representation of Maryland's political, military, and civic history, placed into the hands of millions of Americans. From a technical standpoint, the 2000p Maryland Quarter is a standard copper-nickel-clad Washington quarter produced at the Philadelphia Mint. PCGS records the issue with a mintage of 678,200,000 pieces, making it one of the many state quarter issues produced on a massive scale for circulation. The coin measures approximately 24.3 millimeters across, weighs 5.67 grams, and carries a reeded edge. Its outer layers consist of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a copper core, which explains why the edge can reveal a distinctly copper-colored line beneath the silvery exterior. The familiar obverse portrait of George Washington traces back to John Flanagan's design, while the Maryland reverse was designed and sculpted by Thomas D. Rogers. The U.S. Mint also credits William Cousins as the sculptor-engraver associated with the obverse for the state quarter issues. Every quarter began as carefully prepared metal strip that was rolled to precise dimensions before blanks were punched out, processed, and struck between dies under enormous pressure. The reeded collar helped control the coin's diameter and edge formation, while the dies transferred the intricate Maryland State House and surrounding foliage onto the planchet. Because hundreds of millions had to be produced, consistency was essential, but no industrial minting operation is absolutely perfect. That possibility is one reason collectors inspect these coins so closely today. The sheer size of the mintage creates an important paradox. There are plenty of Maryland quarters, but there are far fewer truly exceptional Maryland quarters. Most entered circulation, where contact with other coins, vending machines, cash registers, pockets, and handling quickly created tiny marks across the fields and high points. Others were saved immediately by collectors and families who understood that the state quarters program was something different from ordinary coinage. Today, an average circulated 2000p Maryland quarter generally has little premium over face value, and NGC's current information places circulated examples around the neighborhood of 30 to 40 cents, while noting that pristine uncirculated examples can bring substantially more. But the high-grade market tells a more complicated story. PCGS lists an auction record of $1,495 for a 2000p Maryland quarter graded MS65, sold by Heritage Auctions on January 12, 2005. That result should not be interpreted as the normal value of an MS65 Maryland quarter today, nor does it mean every 2000p example is remotely close to 4 figures. Auction records can reflect the market environment of a particular year, the competition surrounding a specific coin, and the fact that a certified piece may have characteristics that made it unusually desirable at that moment. The lesson is much more useful than the number itself. Condition can radically alter the market position of a modern coin, even when hundreds of millions were originally struck. Once collectors begin comparing high-grade specimens, the discussion moves away from simple survival and toward quality. A coin can be technically uncirculated and still be disappointing to a specialist because mint state grading is not merely a declaration that the coin was never spent. Graders examine surface preservation, luster, strike quality, contact marks, and overall eye appeal. On a 2000p Maryland quarter, collectors pay particular attention to the open fields surrounding the State House, the clarity of the architectural details, the leaves framing the reverse, and the condition of Washington's portrait on the obverse. A coin that appears brilliant under casual lighting may reveal numerous small abrasions under magnification. Another piece may have fewer marks but show weak areas from the strike. At the highest levels, these differences become extremely important because the population of coins capable of reaching the upper grades becomes dramatically smaller than the original mintage suggests. PCGS documents examples of the 2000p Maryland quarter in grades including MS65, MS66, MS67, and MS68, demonstrating that genuinely elite specimens exist but are far removed from the condition of the average circulated coin. This is also why original luster matters. Natural mint brilliance can make a coin visually powerful, while cleaning, polishing, or artificial surface treatment can destroy the originality that advanced collectors prize. Unlike classic copper cents, a copper-nickel-clad quarter is not normally evaluated through the familiar red, red-brown, and brown color designations used for copper coinage, so dramatic color on a Maryland quarter should never automatically be treated as evidence of rarity. The search becomes even more interesting when collectors investigate varieties and mint-made errors. A genuine error is fundamentally different from damage that occurred after the quarter left the mint. A coin might theoretically display an off-center strike, clipped planchet, struck-through feature, broad strike, die break, or another production anomaly, but each must be evaluated on its own physical evidence rather than by appearance alone. The same is true of supposed doubled designs. Modern quarters can show machine doubling or die deterioration that may look dramatic to an inexperienced eye without representing a valuable doubled die variety. For the 2000p Maryland issue, collectors should be particularly skeptical of internet claims that assign a huge value to ordinary doubling, scratches, discoloration, or damaged lettering without professional attribution. Reliable error attribution requires understanding how the press, planchet, dies, and collar interact during production. Weight can also help establish whether a coin conforms to the normal 5.67 gram specification, but a scale reading by itself cannot authenticate an error. If an apparent error appears substantial enough to justify a four-figure valuation, for example, a hypothetical authenticated specimen around $1,850, the evidence should be strong enough to survive professional examination. The most important rule is simple. Unusual does not automatically mean rare, and rare does not automatically mean valuable unless collectors actually recognize and compete for the characteristic. That principle becomes critical when a Maryland quarter is being considered for professional certification or a serious purchase. Authentication is not just about proving that the date and mint mark are genuine. It is about establishing that the surfaces have not been altered and that any unusual feature originated at the mint. A collector examining a potential high-value piece should inspect the edge, check the weight, compare the design with trusted references, look for signs of tooling or polishing, and study suspicious doubling under magnification. Cleaning is especially dangerous because a person trying to make a quarter look brighter can leave hairlines or chemical changes that permanently alter its surfaces. Storage should therefore be conservative. Avoid PVC-containing materials, excessive humidity, abrasive holders, and unnecessary handling. Hold the coin by its edges and keep fingerprints away from the surfaces. If the piece appears to have a significant mint error or unusually high-grade preservation, submission to a major third-party grading service can provide a professional opinion and encapsulation that establishes a standardized grade. The value difference can become enormous at the top of the market. A common circulated coin might remain essentially a quarter. An attractive uncirculated example may bring a modest premium, while an extraordinary certified specimen or important authenticated error could potentially move into the $2,000 to $4,000 range if genuine rarity and strong demand intersect. Those higher figures should be viewed as exceptional scenarios, not expectations for ordinary 2000p Maryland quarters. What makes the 2000p Maryland quarter enduringly interesting is the tension between abundance and excellence. With 678.2 million struck at Philadelphia, the issue is anything but scarce in the broadest sense, yet the collector market has repeatedly demonstrated that the finest surviving examples can occupy an entirely different category. PCGS's documented $1,495 auction record belongs to a specific certified coin and a specific historical transaction, rather than establishing a universal value for the issue. Meanwhile, NGC's more recent guide information indicates that ordinary circulated examples remain close to face value and that pristine uncirculated pieces can sell for considerably more than worn examples, reinforcing the central truth of modern numismatics. Condition and market demand matter enormously. An exceptional specimen might attract registry-set collectors competing for a superior grade, while an authenticated major error could appeal to a completely different group of specialists. A dramatic auction result, perhaps $2,400, $3,150, or even more for a genuinely rare and certified example, would have to be understood in that context, because such a result would represent the specific qualities of that individual coin rather than the ordinary market value of the entire issue. The Maryland quarter also has something beyond its price potential. It is a tangible record of a remarkable period in American coinage, when the U.S. Mint turned everyday change into a nationwide journey through state history. The dome of the Maryland State House, the white oak leaves, the Revolutionary-era symbolism, and the Old Line State nickname all survive on a piece of copper nickel that millions of Americans once handled without giving it a second thought. For collectors, that is where the real fascination begins, not with the assumption that every 2000p Maryland quarter is rare, but with the possibility that among countless ordinary survivors, a small number may possess the extraordinary combination of grade, originality, error status, authentication, and collector demand that makes one particular coin stand apart from the rest. Next up, the 2000D Massachusetts quarter is one of those coins that can look completely ordinary until you examine it the way a serious numismatist would. The date is familiar, the D is tiny, the Revolutionary War Minuteman seems like a simple design, and hundreds of millions of these quarters entered American commerce. Yet the deeper you look, the more complicated the story becomes. Collectors are not simply asking whether they have a 2000D Massachusetts quarter. They are asking how well it was struck, how clean its surfaces remain, whether its original mint luster survived, how it compares with other coins at the same grade, and whether an unusual characteristic is genuinely mint-made. That distinction is critical because the coin is abundant in general, but can become conditionally scarce at the highest grades. Later in this investigation, we will examine documented auction results and current market information, including an especially important certified high-grade sale, while separating verified evidence from the exaggerated claims that frequently circulate online. The real question is not whether this quarter is rare, but what kind of rarity an individual example may possess, and why sophisticated collectors sometimes compete for a particular coin even when millions of others share exactly the same date and mint mark. To understand why the 2000D Massachusetts quarter became such an interesting modern collectible, we have to return to the beginning of the state quarters era. Massachusetts was the sixth state represented in the 50 state quarters program, and its quarter was released on January 3, 2000, becoming the first state quarter issued during the new millennium. The program itself had been authorized by Public Law 105-124, with the states honored according to their order of admission or ratification, and 5 different state designs scheduled each year from 1999 through 2008. Massachusetts joined a program that had already generated enormous public enthusiasm, but its design process was unusual. Massachusetts held a statewide competition among elementary school students, receiving more than 100 submissions before narrowing the choices and ultimately selecting the Minuteman concept submitted by Xander Katsatos and Kathleen Rhode. The reverse shows the Minuteman against an outline of Massachusetts, with a star identifying Boston, the state capital, and the inscription, the Bay State. The date 1788 represents Massachusetts joining the Union, while 2000 identifies the coin's issue year. The Minuteman itself is a powerful symbol because these colonial citizen soldiers were expected to be ready to respond at very short notice during the Revolutionary War. The imagery, therefore, connects a modern circulating quarter directly to the events surrounding Lexington and Concord, where Massachusetts became one of the central stages of the American Revolution. The result is a coin that combines youthful participation, state identity, and revolutionary history in a design small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Now turn the coin over and inspect it as an object rather than a historical souvenir. The 2000 D Massachusetts quarter was struck at the Denver Mint, and the small D mint mark distinguishes it from the Philadelphia issue bearing P. NGC records a mintage of 535,184,000 for the Denver circulation strike, while listing the coin at approximately 5.67 grams, 24.3 millimeters in diameter, with a reeded edge and copper-nickel-clad copper composition. Its outer layers are made from a copper-nickel alloy bonded to a copper core, which produces the familiar silvery appearance on the faces and the copper-colored line visible along the edge. The obverse retains the classic George Washington portrait associated with John Flanagan, with William Cousins credited as sculptor-engraver for the state quarter-era obverse, while Thomas D. Rogers created the Massachusetts reverse design and sculpture. Production began with carefully prepared metal strip that was rolled to the required thickness before blanks were punched, processed, and ultimately struck between dies under tremendous pressure. A collar controlled the planchet during striking and produced the reeded edge, while the dies transferred Washington's portrait and the Minuteman design onto opposite sides. The Denver Mint had to manufacture these coins on an industrial scale because they were not intended merely for collectors. They were circulating money. That means the question of rarity cannot be answered simply by looking at the original production figure. Instead, we have to follow the coins after they left the mint and ask how many survived in exceptional condition. That is where the 2000 D Massachusetts quarter takes an unexpected turn. More than 535 million were produced at Denver, so an ordinary circulated example is not a scarce coin. Years of spending leave predictable evidence. Washington's cheek and hair lose sharpness, the highest portions of the Minuteman design become smoother, the open fields collect scratches and contact marks, and the once bright mint surfaces become dull from handling and environmental exposure. NGC's current guide places circulated examples around 30 cents to 40 cents, while its grading data shows a dramatic rise as preservation improves, with a listed value reaching $270 for the highest grade shown in its guide. But even those figures do not tell the whole story because the market for modern quarters is heavily influenced by condition rarity. Consider a coin that never spent a day in circulation but still acquired small marks while being transporting in mint bags. It may look brilliant to the naked eye but fail to reach the grade a registry collector wants. Another piece may have fewer distractions, stronger design definition, and exceptional luster, allowing it to enter a much smaller population at the top of the grading scale. That is why experienced collectors do not begin with a magnifying glass looking for a giant error. They first establish the basics: correct date, correct mint mark, normal weight, original surfaces, sharp strike, and absence of obvious damage. A quarter that passes those first tests becomes interesting only when its condition begins to separate it from the enormous population surrounding it. The next stage is grading, and this is where modern coin collecting becomes almost microscopic. An MS-60 coin is technically uncirculated, but it can still display numerous marks and lack the visual appeal expected from a superior specimen. As the grade rises through MS-63, MS-64, MS-65, MS-66, MS-67, and MS-68, the tolerance for distracting contact marks, abrasions, weak strikes, and surface disturbances becomes increasingly strict. On the Massachusetts quarter, examine Washington's cheek, the open field surrounding his portrait, the Minuteman's body and equipment, the outline of the state, and the broad areas of metal where bag marks are easiest to see. Then study the luster. Original mint luster should flow naturally across the surface as the coin is tilted under light. A bright appearance created by polishing or chemical treatment is something completely different. Color deserves similar caution. Copper-nickel-clad quarters are not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, and brown designations used for copper cents, so a spectacularly colored Massachusetts quarter should not automatically be considered rare. Tunning can be natural, but artificial coloring, environmental staining, or cleaning can reduce desirability rather than increase it. The documented population illustrates why the highest grades matter. PCGS's auction information has shown a 2000D Massachusetts MS-68 population of 40, with only one example higher in the cited record, making that grade far more meaningful than the raw mintage might suggest. This is the concept of conditional rarity. Millions may exist, yet only a tiny fraction may survive with the combination of preservation and strike quality required for the very highest grades. Once the coin survives that examination, the investigator can begin looking for something more unusual, a genuine mint error or recognized variety. This is an area where caution is essential because modern state quarters generate enormous numbers of internet claims, and many supposed errors are actually damage, machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, plating disturbances, or changes that happened after the coin left the mint. A legitimate off-center strike, clipped planchet, struck-through error, broad strike, die break, or other production anomaly must be supported by physical evidence consistent with the minting process. The same principle applies to doubled designs. Not every second-looking edge around a letter is a valuable doubled die. A collector should compare the suspected feature with authoritative references, and when the potential premium is substantial, have the coin professionally attributed. Weight is another useful screening tool, because a normal 2000D Massachusetts quarter should be close to the standard 5.67 gram specification, but weight alone cannot prove an error or authenticity. Most importantly, there is no reliable basis for claiming a specific $1,000, $2,000, or $4,000 Massachusetts error without a documented sale or recognized attribution. For this particular issue, the strongest verified evidence points toward high-grade condition rarity rather than a universally accepted date and mintmark error that automatically creates a four-figure value. That distinction protects collectors from one of the most common modern coin mistakes: seeing an unusual-looking quarter online and assuming the asking price is evidence of what the coin is actually worth. Authentication becomes even more important when money is involved. A genuine 2000D Massachusetts quarter should exhibit the correct design proportions, lettering, edge construction, metal characteristics, and mintmark placement expected for the issue. Counterfeiters can alter dates, manipulate surfaces, or create deceptive appearances, although a normal modern state quarter is generally far less attractive to counterfeiters than a rare classic US coin. The greater danger for ordinary collectors is often not a sophisticated counterfeit, but a damaged coin being presented as a valuable error. A scrape near the Minuteman is not necessarily a die break. A strange color is not necessarily a missing clad layer. A soft-looking letter is not automatically a doubled die. If the coin appears exceptional, Preserve it exactly as found. Do not polish it, scrape it, dip it in household chemicals, or attempt to make the surfaces brighter. Store it in an inert holder designed for numismatic material. Keep humidity and contaminants under control, and handle the piece by its edges whenever possible. If professional certification is appropriate, a recognized third-party grading service can authenticate the coin, evaluate its condition, and encapsulate it for long-term protection. That certification matters because the market does not value every uncirculated-looking coin equally. A certified MS-68 can command substantially more confidence than an uncertified coin that a seller simply describes as perfect. NGC's auction records show just how widely results can vary. An MS-64 example brought $156 in a 2018 Heritage sale, while another MS-68 NGC example sold for $129.25 in 2016, and a PCGS MS-68 example reached $400 in a 2018 eBay transaction recorded by PCGS. These are authenticated market observations, not guarantees, and they demonstrate why grade, certification, venue, timing, and buyer demand all matter. The most revealing part of the investigation is what happens at the absolute top of the grading ladder. PCGS currently records the 2000D Massachusetts Circulation Strike auction record at $400 for an MS-68 example, dated December 28, 2018, and its auction database lists numerous lower-grade transactions that are dramatically below that level. Heritage also records a 2000D Massachusetts MS-68 PCGS sale for $180 in April 2024, while earlier examples include an MS-67 PCGS coin sold for $60 in 2000 and an MS-65 NGC coin sold for $7 in 2003. Those results tell us something far more useful than an inflated headline. The market has historically rewarded exceptional preservation, but the premium is concentrated in the finest examples rather than spread across the entire mintage. Some internet sources claim dramatically higher figures, including four-figure or even multi-thousand-dollar prices, but those claims should not be repeated as established facts when they conflict with the stronger auction evidence available from PCGS, NGC, and major auction archives. For this reason, a responsible collector should not assign a hypothetical $1,750, $2,650, or $3,800 value to a 2000D Massachusetts quarter simply because it looks unusually shiny. There must be documented evidence supporting such a valuation, an authenticated extraordinary grade, a genuinely important and recognized error, or another characteristic that collectors demonstrably compete for. In the ordinary market, the vast majority of these quarters remain inexpensive. Yet the finest certified specimens demonstrate why modern coins can become condition rarities even when their original production numbers are enormous. The 2000D Massachusetts quarter ultimately tells two stories at once. One is the story of the Minutemen, Boston, the Revolutionary War, and Massachusetts' admission to the Union in 1788. The other is a lesson in modern numismatics, where billions of ordinary coins can be produced, but only a small number emerge from the mint, transportation, storage, circulation, and decades of handling with the preservation required to become genuinely exceptional. That is why the experienced collector does not merely ask, "Is this a 2000D Massachusetts quarter?" The better question is, exactly what survived here? Last coin. The 2000D Virginia State Quarter is a fascinating coin because almost everything about it suggests abundance, yet the finest examples tell a very different story. More than $500 million was struck at Denver, and millions upon millions entered American commerce, passed through cash registers, vending machines, pockets, and coin jars. To most people, it is simply a quarter showing 3 sailing ships, but to a numismatist, those ships are the beginning of an investigation. The tiny D, the sharpness of the lettering, the condition of Washington's portrait, the quality of the ship details, the preservation of the original mint surfaces, and even the smallest marks can determine whether a particular specimen is ordinary or genuinely desirable. The 2000D issue has also produced certified high-grade pieces that attracted serious bidding, proving that modern state quarters can develop meaningful condition rarity even when their original production numbers are enormous. Later, we will examine the documented auction evidence, the grades that separate exceptional pieces from ordinary ones, and the characteristics collectors examine before assigning a premium. Most importantly, we will separate verified numismatic information from the exaggerated claims that often surround modern, rare quarter stories, because the real fascination of this coin is not that every example is valuable. It is that a small fraction of them survived in a condition that collectors were willing to compete for. The historical story begins with Virginia itself and reaches back nearly 4 centuries before this quarter ever entered circulation. Virginia became the 10th state represented in the 50-state quarters program, and the U.S. Mint officially released the Virginia quarter on October 16, 2000. It was the 10th state quarter overall and the 5th new state quarter of that year. The design was deliberately connected to Jamestown, the settlement founded in 1607 by English colonists, and it features the 3 ships associated with that voyage: the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. The reverse inscriptions include Jamestown 1607 2007 and QADSENTNNIL, because the coin was issued 7 years before the 400th anniversary it anticipated. The date 1788 represents Virginia's admission to the Union, while 2000 identifies the coin's production year. The U.S. Mint describes the reverse artist and sculptor as Edgar Z. Stever, while the obverse carries the familiar George Washington portrait originally designed by John Flanagan, with William Cousins credited as obverse sculptor for the State Quarter series. The symbolism is unusually rich for a circulating quarter. The 3 ships represent the dangerous Atlantic voyage that carried the settlers toward Virginia, while their arrangement creates a sense of movement toward the future. Yet there is also an important historical distinction. The quarter commemorates the founding of Jamestown and its 400th anniversary, not Virginia's statehood anniversary. That matters when examining the coin because the dates printed on the reverse tell 3 separate stories: 1607 for Jamestown, 1788 for statehood, and 2000 for the quarter itself. The result is a compact historical timeline hidden in plain sight. Now examine the physical object as if we had never seen one before. The D beneath the design tells us that this particular quarter was struck at the Denver Mint. Separating it from the Philadelphia issue marked with a P, PCGS lists the 2000 D Virginia quarter with a mintage of 651,616,000 pieces, a diameter of 24.3 millimeters, a weight of 5.67 grams, a reeded edge, and a composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel over copper core. That copper-nickel-clad construction is important when examining the edge. A normal quarter should reveal the copper core as a narrow reddish-brown line between the outer layers. A completely different-looking edge does not automatically mean silver or rarity. Plating and post-mint alterations can create misleading appearances. The coin began as precisely manufactured metal strip that was rolled to the required thickness, punched into blanks, processed, and then fed into high-speed coining equipment. During striking, enormous pressure forced the obverse and reverse designs into the planchet, while a collar controlled the coin's dimensions and helped create the reeded edge. On the obverse, Washington remains surrounded by the familiar inscriptions United States of America, Liberty, In God We Trust, and Quarter Dollar. On the reverse, the ships dominate the field, with Virginia and the historical inscriptions arranged around them. Because these were circulation coins rather than a limited commemorative issue, production was designed for the needs of commerce. The Denver Mint, therefore, had to manufacture them by the hundreds of millions. That scale is precisely why the D alone cannot make one rare. Instead, it gives us the first clue in an investigation. We know which production facility made the coin, and from there, we can begin asking what happened to this particular specimen after it left the mint. The trail from the Denver presses to the collector's cabinet is where condition rarity begins. The Virginia quarter was distributed through the Federal Reserve System and entered circulation in October 2000, meaning that many examples immediately experienced the normal violence of everyday money. Coins collide with one another in bags and rolls, scrape against metal surfaces in cash drawers, and accumulate marks as they travel through vending machines and counting equipment. Even a coin that never technically circulated can acquire contact marks simply from being packed and transporting with thousands of other quarters. Look closely at Washington's cheek and jawline first. Then move toward the open fields, where small abrasions become especially visible. Turn the coin over and inspect the sails, hulls, lettering, and the spaces surrounding the three ships. A strong strike should preserve the intended design with crisp definition, while a weaker strike can soften details even though the coin has never been spent. Original luster is another clue. Under a single light source, rotate the coin slowly and watch how the brilliance moves across the surface. Natural mint luster has a characteristic flow created by the interaction of the metal and dyes during striking. A flat, overly bright appearance can sometimes indicate cleaning or alteration. This is why two coins that both appear uncirculated to an inexperienced viewer can receive very different professional grades. PCGS describes MS66 and lower examples as relatively obtainable, while MS67 becomes more difficult and MS68 is described as very difficult to obtain. Its current population data shows 872 PCGS-certified MS66 examples, 520 MS67 examples, and only 17 MS68 examples in the cited report, with no higher PCGS examples listed there. Those numbers do not represent the total number of coins in existence, because many remain uncertified, but they demonstrate why the highest certified grades can attract attention despite the enormous original mintage. At this point, the investigation moves from history into the psychology of the collector market. A collector assembling an ordinary state quarter set may be satisfied with a clean example, but a registry set specialist wants something much more difficult, a coin that ranks among the finest certified pieces available. The difference between MS66 and MS68 may be almost invisible to someone viewing the coin casually, yet to an experienced grader, it can involve a combination of surface marks, strike strength, luster, and overall preservation. The market has repeatedly demonstrated this distinction. PCGS records a 2000D Virginia MS68 example that sold for $940 at Heritage auctions in January 2017, while the same certified coin later appeared at Heritage's Long Beach auction in February 2018 and realized $840. Another MS68 PCGS specimen sold for $780 at Heritage in December 2018, and a different MS68 PCGS example brought $168 at Stack's Bowers in April 2023. Those results are extremely useful because they show how market value can change without the underlying date and mint mark changing at all. An MS68 that once brought several $100s is not automatically worth the same amount years later. Auction venue, timing, certification population, collector competition, and the individual coins I appeal all matter. This is also why a supposed $1,500 or $2,500 valuation should never be attached to an ordinary raw 2000D Virginia quarter merely because someone online has posted a dramatic asking price. Verified auction results are evidence, unsold listings are not. A collector might reasonably encounter a certified exceptional example in the hundreds of dollars, but a four-figure result requires a very specific market situation and should be supported by actual transaction records. The documented MS68 sales show that the most important value driver here is exceptional condition rather than the mere fact that the coin is a 2000D Virginia quarter. There is another question experienced collectors eventually ask. Does the coin contain an error or variety that changes the equation completely? Modern state quarters have generated enormous interest in mint errors, but they have also generated enormous amounts of misinformation. A genuine mint-made error must be physically consistent with a failure somewhere in the production process. Off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through pieces, die breaks, and other errors can exist in modern coinage, but each individual coin must be examined on its own evidence. The distinction between a mint error and post-mint damage is especially important on a quarter this common. A scrape around the ships may simply be a scrape. A strange line can be a die characteristic or damage. A soft numeral may result from a filled portion of the die rather than a dramatic variety. Even color can be deceptive. Gold-colored or unusually bright state quarters are sometimes plated or chemically altered outside the mint. A normal clad quarter should also remain close to its standard 5.67 gram weight, although a scale alone cannot prove authenticity or error status. Interestingly, documented auction databases do show that error-designated Virginia state quarters exist within the broader series, including a 2000p Virginia struck-through grease example that sold for $15 in 2011. But that is the Philadelphia issue rather than the Denver coin examined here. That distinction is important. We should never transfer the characteristics or prices of a p-mint error onto a d-mint coin without direct evidence. For the 2000D Virginia issue, the strongest verified premium story is the certified high-grade market. If someone encounters an apparent major error on a Denver example, the correct response is not to assume a $2,100 or $3,400 value. It is to preserve the coin, document the feature, compare it with authoritative references, and seek professional attribution before assigning any serious market value. Authentication and preservation are therefore part of the value story, not afterthoughts. When a coin appears unusually valuable, collectors should begin with the fundamentals. Verify the date, confirm the D-mint mark, examine the edge, check the weight, inspect the lettering and ship details under magnification, and look for evidence of cleaning, polishing, plating, tooling, or other post-mint manipulation. Counterfeit detection on a modern quarter is less about hunting for an elaborate fake and more about recognizing when a coin has been altered to look like something it is not. A missing or distorted feature can result from damage rather than an error, while artificial color can make a common coin appear extraordinary. The safest preservation strategy is equally straightforward. Do not rub the surfaces with a cloth, do not polish the coin, and do not use household chemicals or abrasive cleaners. Hold it by the edge, keep it away from PVC-containing materials and excessive humidity, and use an inert holder or professionally sealed holder for a piece worth preserving. Professional certification can become particularly useful when a coin approaches the upper end of the market because a third-party grade gives buyers and sellers a standardized reference point. The documented market illustrates why that matters. PCGS lists an MS-66 example sold by Heritage in October 2001 for $15, another MS-66 for $11 in January 2004, and an MS-68 at $780 in December 2018. The spread is not a mystery once the grades are understood. An ordinary high-grade coin may have hundreds or thousands of comparable competitors, while an MS-68 can occupy a much smaller population. In an unusually competitive sale, an exceptional certified specimen could move into four-figure territory, perhaps around $1,700 or even higher. But such a result would represent the individual coin's extraordinary grade, certification, eye appeal, and market circumstances, not the ordinary value of every 2000D Virginia quarter. The final piece of the investigation is the historical paradox this coin represents. It was struck in 2000 to circulate as ordinary money, yet its reverse was looking backward to 1607 and forward to 2007, commemorating the quadricentennial of Jamestown's 7 years before the anniversary actually arrived. The U.S. Mint even celebrated the release at Jamestown on October 16, 2000, with replicas of the 3 ships represented on the coin, while the Federal Reserve release brought the new quarters into public circulation. The quarter, therefore, became a bridge between American history and modern, everyday commerce. Its 3 ships, the inscriptions Jamestown 1607-2007 and QUADOCENTNNIL, Virginia's 1788 statehood date, and the 2000 issue date all turn a small piece of clad metal into a chronological record of an important American story. From a market perspective, however, the lesson is equally clear. PCGS currently identifies the 2000D Virginia Quarters auction record as $1,610 for an AU-55 example sold by Heritage in May 2004, while its documented MS-68 sales include $940 in 2017, $840 in 2018, and $780 later in 2018. Because that $1,610 record is unusual in relation to the coin's certified high-grade market, it should not be casually presented as the normal value of an AU-55 coin. Auction records can reflect individual circumstances, and the published record itself is the safest way to report it without inventing an explanation. What we can say with confidence is that documented exceptional examples have attracted serious money, while most circulated pieces remain common. A hypothetical $2,800 or $3,900 valuation would require evidence far beyond the date and mint mark, such as a recognized major error, exceptional certification, or another genuinely scarce characteristic supported by market transactions. That is the real lesson of the 2000D Virginia Quarter. Rarity is not always created when the mint produces fewer coins. Sometimes it emerges decades later when collectors discover just how few examples survived at the very highest level of preservation. And once you learn to see that difference, even an ordinary quarter can become the beginning of a much deeper investigation. The next overlooked coin may be hiding in plain sight.